Welcome to VSOW, where we take a stack of compelling sources from philosophy to social science and extract the critical knowledge you need to be deeply informed. Our mission today is an extensive deep dive into the fundamental human drive for meaning, connection, and community. We are tackling a massive intellectual sweep, examining foundational texts like Aristotle's view on friendship and community, contrasting that with the communitarian critique of radical individualism, and finally, using modern psychology to understand how purpose and belonging drive our health and intimate relationships.
And we're really focusing on a profound tension, I think, that defines much of modern life. It's this friction between the heavily prized Western ideal of individual autonomy, the self-sufficient, maybe even atomistic person, and the essential, persistent human requirement for relationality and a shared higher purpose. Our sources, well, they suggest that prioritizing the self, purely the self, at the expense of the social world, is fundamentally detrimental to flourishing. It just doesn't work long term.
Right. And for you, our listener, the central question we are exploring today is practical and, honestly, quite personal. When does our necessary pursuit of self-determination actually cross the line and become counterproductive isolation? And maybe more importantly, what role does a clearly defined, consistent purpose play in effectively bridging that gap between the autonomous self and the necessary social world around us? Let's begin our exploration where this inquiry truly began, with the ancient foundations of human necessity. Okay, let's unpack this idea of connection. In modern society, we tend to frame friendship as, well, desirable but ultimately optional, right? A life enhancement, a bonus perhaps, that makes life sweeter.
Like an add-on.
Exactly. But when we look at Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, the perspective is dramatically different. He elevates friendship or philia to something most necessary for our life. That's a strong claim. What makes this such a foundational point for him?
Well, it's foundational because Aristotle treats friendship not just as a virtue, not just something admirable, but as a necessary condition for a well-lived life, for eudaimonia itself. He states it very explicitly. No one would choose to live without friends, even if he had all the other goods. Imagine having everything else, wealth, health, power, you name it, without friends. Life would still be considered lacking, undesirable.
So it's not just icing on the cake, it is the cake, or at least a critical ingredient.
Absolutely. He's asserting it is a non-negotiable component of human existence. But, immediately he recognized this necessity was complex. It wasn't simple. And that's why he dedicated so much thought to it. He raised several disputed points right at the outset. Things like, does friendship arise universally among all people? Can vicious or fundamentally flawed individuals even form genuine friendships?
Interesting questions.
And is friendship just one thing, or are there distinct, different types? These philosophical ambiguities, they really force us to define what love and connection truly mean.
Okay, so to structure his answer, he first had to establish the fundamental causes of attraction. What, in his view, makes something lovable in the first place? What draws us in?
He identified three foundational causes, or you could say ways something can be lovable. There's the good, the pleasant, or the useful. These are the basic motivations for any kind of attachment we form, whether it's liking an object or liking a person. Pretty much everything we desire, he argued, falls into one of these three categories.
Wait a second. If those are the three causes of love, how did he distinguish between just liking something and true friendship? Because, I might love a good cup of coffee. It's certainly pleasant, maybe useful for waking me up, but that's definitely not a friend.
That's the critical distinction he makes, and it's brilliant. When you love an inanimate object, like your coffee or maybe a bottle of fine wine, you might wish good things for it. You want it preserved, perhaps, but why? So that you can continue to enjoy the pleasant or useful benefit it provides to you. That is love, of a sort. But it lacks the necessary criteria for friendship. It's self-referential.
Okay, so what are those necessary criteria then? What elevates liking to friendship?
True friendship, according to Aristotle, requires three specific things. First, you must have goodwill toward the other person. You have to wish them well. Second, that goodwill must be expressed as wishing goods for the other person for his own sake, not because of some secondary benefit you might gain from their well-being. It's about them.
Not just because it makes me feel good to wish them well.
Exactly. And third, crucially, that wishing must be mutually recognized and reciprocated. If you wish good for someone else, but they don't know it, or they don't return that exact sentiment for your sake, you have goodwill, maybe affection, but you do not have the formal relationship of friendship as he defined it. It has to be a two-way street, and both people have to know it.
That reciprocal goodwill offered for the other's inherent value. That sounds like a pretty high standard. And that seems to lead us directly to his hierarchy of friendships, right? Where he separates these maybe more fragile bonds from the truly enduring ones.
Indeed, it sets up the whole structure. The two lowest forms are based on utility and pleasure. In utility friendships, the bond exists, well, only because each person gains some practical advantage. Think business partners, maybe political allies. The moment one person ceases to be useful to the other, the affection or what passed for it just vanishes. The reason for the connection is gone.
Makes sense. Transactional.
Very much so. And similarly, pleasure friendships are fleeting. You like the person because they are witty, entertaining, fun to be around, they are pleasant to you. But if they stop providing that immediate gratification, maybe they go through a rough patch or just change, the basis of the relationship disappears.
And this feels incredibly relevant to modern society, doesn't it? If we're constantly prioritizing utility and pleasure, connections based purely on networking for gain or chasing the immediate buzz from social media interactions, we're building bonds that Aristotle would say are inherently unstable, built on sand.
Absolutely. He specifically observed that young people often gravitate towards pleasure friendships. Why? Because they live, as he put it, under the guidance of emotion. And they pursue what is immediately gratifying right now. And because their desires and pleasures are constantly shifting as they mature and experience life, these friendships are, well, they're quickly formed and just as quickly dissolved. They are contingent bonds, completely vulnerable to any shift in external circumstance or internal feeling.
Okay, so those are the lower, unstable forms. What's at the top?
Now, in stark contrast, we have the highest form, complete friendship. This is the friendship of good people similar in virtue. The bond here is fundamentally different. They are committed to each other not because of any utility they provide or any pleasure they offer, but because they genuinely recognize and admire the goodness in the other person's character. They wish goods for the friend insofar as the friend is good. It's about appreciating their core being. So the affection is based on something enduring, virtue itself, which means the friendship itself becomes enduring. It lasts as long as they are good. And virtue, ideally, is a stable quality.
That is the philosophical strength and beauty of it. However, Aristotle was also a realist. He noted that these complete friendships are exceptionally rare, very hard to find, and harder to maintain. They demand time, real time spent together. They demand habituation, getting used to each other, seeing each other in different contexts, and they demand confidence to grow. You need to trust the other person's character is consistently virtuous and that their goodwill towards you is truly non-contingent.
Right. You can't just meet someone and declare complete friendship.
Exactly. The desire for this kind of deep connection might be quick, but the reality of forming it is a slow, deliberate process of tested commitment and mutual revelation. Okay, if we zoom out a bit from the personal level, Aristotle was profoundly concerned with politics and the ideal structure of the polis, the city-state. How did he link this intense focus on personal friendship back to the larger social and political structure? Was there a connection for him?
Oh, absolutely. A direct and critical line. He saw friendship as the psychological and social underpinning of a just and stable society. For Aristotle, friendship is intrinsically tied to community and justice. In fact, he went so far as to argue that justice requires friendship. Think about it. If people within a community treat each other with the reciprocal goodwill inherent in true friendship, what happens? Political disputes are minimized, cooperation increases, and the need for rigorous, externally enforced justice systems is actually reduced.
Because people are already inclined to treat each other fairly out of mutual regard.
Precisely. A good political community, in his view, essentially functions like a large community of mutually benevolent friends, or at least citizens oriented towards that ideal. Therefore, by understanding the foundational requirements of enduring personal connection, we gain insight into the necessary conditions for a stable and flourishing political life. It starts with how we relate one-on-one. So Aristotle provided let's call it the philosophical why we fundamentally need connection. Fast forward 2 millennia, and modern social psychology steps in with empirical data to explain the how and the deeper why this need is so powerful psychologically. We move now to social identity theory, or SIT, which really details the psychological mechanism of belonging.
And it sounds like modern research unequivocally confirms Aristotle's necessity claim, doesn't it? Group belongingness is identified pretty consistently as a fundamental human need. So why is this need so crucial for the individual psyche? What exactly does belonging provide us with?
It provides at least 3 absolutely essential psychological resources. First, identity. It helps define who we are by giving us a social category, a place to belong in the social map. I am one of those people. Second, purpose. By sharing goals and values with a group, our individual efforts suddenly gain a higher meaning, a sense of contributing to something larger than ourselves. And third, support. It provides that vital emotional and sometimes physical safety net needed for survival, resilience, and stability. When this fundamental need for belonging is met, it fundamentally shapes an individual's attitudes, their behaviors, and critically, their overall well-being and even physical health.
Okay, and crucial to this theory is the concept of social identity.
Yeah.
Can you break that down? How is it different from just being part of a group?
Right. Social identity is the part of your individual self-concept, your idea of who you are that is derived directly from your membership in social groups. It encompasses that sense of belonging, the shared values you internalize, and the emotional attachment you feel towards that group. This is distinct from simple group membership, which might just be the formal or informal fact of affiliation. Think about the difference between, say, being listed as a member of a university alumni association versus feeling like a Badger or a Wolverine, and having that identity shape how you see yourself and the world. One is a label, the other is internalized.
Got it. So social identity is the part that becomes part of you. This theory, largely developed by Henry Tajfel and John Turner, explains that humans are actively striving to achieve a positive social identity. We want our groups to be seen favorably. How does the theory explain the actual cognitive process of forming this identity?
It generally happens in three overlapping cognitive stages. The first is social categorization. This is essentially our brain's automatic way of simplifying the incredibly complex social world we navigate every day. We mentally classify ourselves and others into various groups based on shared characteristics, could be age, gender, ethnicity, occupation, hobbies, even just being a fan of a particular sports team. This creates the cognitive boundary between us, the in-group, and them, the out-group. It's a necessary mental shortcut to make sense of everything.
Okay, categorization happens first.
Hmm.
And that categorization then leads to the second step, which is actually internalizing the group, taking it on board.
Correct. That leads into social identification. Once we've mentally categorized ourselves as part of a group, we begin to internalize that group's identity, its norms, its values, its typical behaviors. This is the stage where the group becomes integrated into our self-concept. And when that identification is strong, the individual's self-esteem and their overall sense of well-being become deeply intertwined with the group's perceived success or failure. Its triumphs feel like my triumphs. Its status reflects on me.
Right, that makes sense.
And this link is vital because it provides that powerful, consistent sense of shared purpose and the emotional support that buffers us against personal stress and uncertainty.
Okay, so if I identify strongly with, say, my professional organization, its success feels like my personal success, and its ethical code becomes my own guiding principle. And the final process uses this strong identification to kind of position the self and the group in the broader social hierarchy.
That's the third stage, social comparison. We seem to have an instinctive drive to evaluate our in-group against relevant out-groups. And the motivation here, according to Tajfel and Turner, is to achieve positive distinctiveness. That's the desire to perceive one's own in-group as demonstrably superior, or at least positively different on some valued dimension, maybe more competent, more moral, more cooperative, whatever is valued.
So we compare to feel better about our group and therefore ourselves.
Essentially, yes. By highlighting the in-group's achievements, positive qualities, or moral standing, and perhaps implicitly or sometimes explicitly devaluing the out-group, this comparison mechanism successfully enhances the individual's self-esteem and reinforces the strength and value of their social identity.
This is a fascinating mechanism. It almost feels like a psychological blueprint that validates Aristotle's structure of community, but through a completely different, more empirical lens. Let's look at what factors determine how strongly someone identifies with a particular group. What makes some identities more central or stable than others?
That's a great question. We can look at this through roughly three lenses: factors related to the individual, factors related to the group itself, and factors related to the broader societal context. At the individual level, personality certainly plays a role. Research suggests people higher in traits like extroversion or agreeableness are naturally more motivated to seek out and maintain strong group ties. They find social interaction more rewarding. Also, certain cognitive factors matter. For instance, individuals with high self-concept clarity, meaning they have a clear, stable, and well-defined understanding of who they are as individuals, tend to form more consistent and robust group identifications. It seems knowing yourself helps you know where you fit.
Okay, so individual personality and self-understanding matter. What about the group itself? Are there structural elements or characteristics of a group that make it more effective at fostering that deep sense of belonging and identification?
Absolutely. Group size is an interesting variable. While very small, intimate groups can provide intense closeness and validation, larger groups can sometimes offer a wider net of social support, more diverse resources, and perhaps a more pervasive sense of collective identity or power. But perhaps most critical is cohesion. Groups characterized by mutual trust, strong interpersonal bonds between members, shared emotional experiences, and a high degree of perceived similarity in core values and goals are far more successful in establishing a durable, strong collective identity.
Like a well-functioning team.
Exactly. That synergy means the group can act almost as one organism, maximizing the psychological benefits, the identity, purpose, and support for all its members.
And we can't ignore the massive influence of the cultural environment we were raised in, can we? That must shape how we approach groups.
Precisely. The societal and cultural context is huge. We see radical differences, for example, between broadly collectivist cultures and individualistic cultures. Collectivist cultures, which emphasize interdependence, harmony, and group goals over individual desires, naturally foster deep and pervasive group identification. Loyalty and cooperation towards the in-group are often framed as moral imperatives. Think of many East Asian cultures, for example.
Compared to, say, the US or Western Europe.
Right. In contrast, individualistic cultures tend to prioritize self-expression, personal achievement, autonomy, and the setting of clear personal boundaries. This often leads to group affiliations that might be more numerous, but perhaps more temporary, instrumental, or less intensely felt than in collectivist settings. Furthermore, modern social institutions like family structures, educational systems emphasizing competition versus cooperation, and especially media and technology also act as powerful cultural factors. They constantly shape, reinforce, or even create social identities. Think about the rise of virtual communities and online identities influencing who we connect with and how strongly we feel that connection.
Okay, this deep, almost biological need for community and identity that psychology describes provided the intellectual bedrock for a really powerful modern philosophical challenge known as communitarianism. This movement developed largely in the late 20th century, specifically to critique the core assumptions of traditional liberal theories that often champion the autonomous, solitary, self-sufficient individual as the ideal.
That's right. Communitarianism starts from a fundamentally different premise. It argues that the foundation of human identity is not some pre-social, self-determined autonomy, but rather our constitutive communities and the social relationships we are embedded in from birth. Therefore, any valid moral or political judgment must, in their view, be rooted in this social understanding of human nature. The primary ethical and political obligation, then, isn't just protecting individual rights in a vacuum, but actively supporting the particular communities, family, neighborhood, cultural groups, nation, that provide the meaning, the values, and the moral framework necessary for a flourishing human life.
So the idea is that without these communities, the self is kind of lost at sea.
Exactly. The sources suggest that without these constitutive ties, the self becomes disoriented, deeply lonely, and incapable of informed moral and political judgment. Community isn't optional. It's what makes us who we are and enables us to act meaningfully.
This movement gained quite a bit of notoriety, particularly as a critique of certain strands of liberal philosophy, especially the influential work of John Rawls. What exactly was the fundamental philosophical disagreement there, particularly regarding the nature of the self?
It was really a two-pronged critique, focusing on ontology and methodology. The first was the ontological claim concerning the very nature of the self. Liberal theory, particularly in the Rawlsian tradition, often posits the idea of the unencumbered self or the atomistic self, the notion that an individual exists prior to and can define their moral obligations independently of their social context, their goals, their attachments.
Like we can step outside our lives and choose our values from scratch?
Kind of, yes. Communitarians vehemently reject this. They argue that our identities are fundamentally shaped, even constituted, by involuntary communal attachments. Our language, our family history, our cultural narratives, our nationality. These aren't things we choose, they are inheritances. And these attachments are so integral to who we are that they can only be set aside at great cost, if at all, often leading to profound psychological damage, alienation, or what sociologists call anomie, a sense of normlessness. We are not self-created atoms, we are socially woven beings.
So the argument is that much of our life, our identity, is governed by these unchosen connections, routines, and habits that define us, regardless of whether we reflectively endorse them or not. What was the second major point of contention, the methodological one, related to how we determine justice?
That was the methodological claim. The debate between universalism versus particularism. Liberal theory often strives to find a universal, neutral standpoint, what some call an Archimedean point, outside of any specific time, context, or culture from which to determine impartial, universally valid standards of justice that should apply to all societies, everywhere.
The kind of one-size-fits-all justice.
Essentially, communitarians argue this is not only impossible, but potentially dangerous. They insist that standards of justice, fairness, and moral goodness must be rooted in and interpreted through the specific forms of life, the shared understandings, traditions, and narratives of particular societies. Justice, for them, is inherently contextual, not abstractly universal. They often view the attempt to impose supposedly universal principles without deep reference to local history, culture, and values as a form of intellectual or even political imperialism.
Okay, so if the intellectual goal is to recognize the importance of community, the political communitarian movement then needed to define and promote specific types of valued communities that society should actively nurture. What were the main categories they identified as needing support?
They typically highlighted three main types. The first category is communities of place. This refers quite simply to the geographical locality, the neighborhood, the town, the region, the physical place an individual calls home. Politically, advocating for communities of place means supporting policies that protect the existing character and stability of local communities. This could include measures to guard against the destabilizing effects of, say, rapid capital mobility factories closing overnight, or maybe zoning restrictions designed to prevent the displacement of small, locally owned stores by large, impersonal corporate chains. The aim is to foster stable, recognizable, human-scale local environments.
Okay, so protecting the local fabric. Then they move beyond just geography, right?
Yes. The second type is communities of memory. These are typically much larger groups, often consisting of millions of people who may never meet, but who feel connected because they share a morally significant history that stretches back over generations. Think of a nation sharing a narrative of its founding, or a specific ethnocultural group united by historical experiences and traditions. Members feel a common bond because they see themselves as part of an ongoing story, striving to realize ideals embedded in their shared past.
And politically, how would one support that?
Politically, this translates into efforts aimed at reinforcing those historical and cultural bonds. Things like promoting mandatory national service, developing a shared national history curriculum in schools that emphasizes common values, or funding programs that support specific cultural heritage preservation, all intended to nourish that sense of shared identity rooted in time. And the third category is perhaps the most fundamental and intimate: psychological communities. These are defined by regular, typically face-to-face interaction, governed by high levels of trust, cooperation, and altruism. They are usually restricted in size, with the family being the classic example. But they can also include things like close-knit work teams, certain religious congregations, or maybe small school settings where deep bonds form.
And policies supporting these.
Policies here would emphasize measures that strengthen these core relational units, things like encouraging the institution of marriage, providing robust family support systems like parental leave or affordable childcare, and maybe restructuring educational environments to prioritize small group cooperation and mutual support over purely individual competition.
Now, here's where it gets complicated in practice, isn't it? The source material explicitly notes that striving to be deeply involved and committed to all three types of communities, place, memory, and psychological, can create inevitable conflicts for individuals. Can you give us an example of how that plays out?
Certainly. A classic and often painful example is the inherent conflict between deep commitment to family life, a core psychological community, and the often demanding commitments of the modern workplace, which can also function as a psychological community, but one that is often prioritized in capitalist societies. We see this tragically illustrated in phenomena like the Japanese concept of karoshi, which literally means death from overwork. This occurs when an employee's excessive devotion to their workplace, perhaps viewing it as their primary community or source of identity and obligation, is pushed so far that it fundamentally undermines their ability to sustain a healthy family life, engage in civic affairs, community of place memory, and ultimately damages their own physical and mental health.
So you can't always perfectly balance these commitments.
No. Hard choices and trade-offs are constantly required, demonstrating that even pursuing valued communal life is not always harmonious or easy. There are inherent tensions.
Let's try to connect this back to the broader concept introduced in Source E, the idea of relationality, particularly concerning justice. If a loving civilization, as the source puts it, sees everything as interconnected and shaped by relationships, how does justice fit into that picture?
It's central. The core premise of a loving civilization based on relationality is that all entities, not just humans, but perhaps animals, ecosystems, the environment, are inevitably interconnected and shaped by their relationships. You can't isolate one part without affecting the whole. Therefore, achieving the genuine good of any one individual or entity necessarily requires contributing to, or at least not harming, the good of the whole system it's part of. And justice becomes the essential component to ensure this balance is actively maintained and sought.
So how does that contrast with a purely individualistic view?
Well, radical individualism, by relentlessly prioritizing self-oriented gain and the maximization of individual autonomy, often without regard for consequences on others or the system, frequently leads directly to systemic issues. The sources point specifically to things like profound income inequality and what they call resource hogging. In a relational framework, such outcomes are seen as intrinsically unjust precisely because the flourishing of a few is secured at the direct detriment of the many or damages the overall health of the social or ecological system. Justice, therefore, isn't just about fair rules for competition. It's about structuring society in a way that recognizes our mutual interdependence and actively promotes collective well-being alongside individual aspirations. It's a very different starting point.
That brings us right back to the individual, but maybe in a different way. If community is the necessary vehicle for a good life, as the communitarians argue, what's the engine that drives the individual? If relationality is essential externally, what is the internal psychological mechanism that motivates and directs the individual to engage with the world, with others, in a healthy, sustained, and meaningful way? Modern psychology suggests the answer might be a clear, consistent sense of purpose.
Yes, this is a really robust and exciting area in positive psychology and health psychology. Purpose is defined quite rigorously here. It's not just a vague feeling, it's conceived as a central, self-organizing life aim. Think of it as a kind of ultimate mission statement for your life. This central aim has the power to stimulate, manage, and organize your lower-level goals and day-to-day behaviors, providing a profound, stable sense of meaning and direction.
So it acts like a compass.
Exactly. A compass and maybe also a resource manager. It guides the use of all your finite resources, your time, your physical energy, your cognitive load, and it becomes fundamentally woven into the fabric of your identity, who you understand yourself to be.
Now, it seems crucial here to clarify what purpose, in this psychological sense, is not. People often confuse it with simpler goals, or maybe with spirituality or religion. Can you help differentiate purpose from these related concepts?
That differentiation is absolutely key for understanding the research. First, purpose is distinct from religiosity or spirituality, although, importantly, those belief systems very often provide people with a strong sense of purpose.
Yeah.
But you can have a strong purpose that is entirely secular. More critically, purpose differs significantly from simple goals. If we use maybe a business analogy, a goal is like a department manager tasked with a specific, often short-term objective, like launching a new product by next Tuesday. It has a clear endpoint. Purpose, on the other hand, is more like the superordinate goal manager. It's the CEO, or maybe the company's core mission statement. It sets the overarching direction, why the company exists, that then stimulates the creation and pursuit of many smaller, consistent goals across different departments and contexts, your time, your energy, and your relationships. While goals typically have terminal outcomes, you achieve them, and their done purpose, much like core values, is often a continuous driver. It provides direction without necessarily having a specific endpoint. It gives coherence over time.
That makes sense. Purpose provides the overarching consistency across a person's life, guiding the selection and pursuit of goals. And you mentioned this links strongly to health outcomes.
Yes, let's definitely discuss that empirical link because the data here is quite striking, particularly regarding physical health and longevity. It's not just about feeling good, it's about living longer and healthier. The empirical evidence is really quite vast and growing. Study after study consistently demonstrates that people who report having a higher sense of purpose in life, or who engage in activities strongly aligned with a sense of purpose, things like volunteering their time consistently, providing regular social support to others, maintaining strong social ties, even caring for dependents like children or pets, these individuals exhibit significantly greater longevity and have markedly lower mortality rates from various causes.
Wow. Are there specific numbers on that?
Well, one study mentioned in the source material, for example, found that older adult volunteers, whose behavior is clearly externally oriented and often purpose-driven, had something like a 60% lower mortality rate over the study period compared with non-volunteers, even after controlling for other health factors.
60%. That's huge.
It's not a marginal difference. It's a profound protective factor against mortality.
So how does psychology explain the mechanism behind this? It seems too significant to be purely behavioral. There must be some biological pathway linking a psychological state like purpose to increased longevity.
Absolutely. The leading explanation comes from the fascinating field of psychoneuroimmunology, or PNI, which studies the intricate connections between our brain, psycho, our nervous system, neuro, and our immune system,
Hmm.
immunology. The core idea is that having a clear purpose fundamentally leads to more efficient resource allocation within the body. This isn't just about managing time better. It includes allocating physical energy, biochemical resources like hormones and neurotransmitters, neural pathways in the brain, and even our finite cognitive load more effectively.
How does that help with stress?
By providing clarity and direction, purpose minimizes internal conflicts, ambiguity about what matters, and thus reduces the overall cognitive and emotional effort required for daily decision-making and navigating challenges. This efficient allocation acts as a powerful buffer against the well-known destructive physiological effects of chronic stress. We know chronic stress leads to sustained release of hormones like cortisol, which over time severely compromises immune function, increases inflammation, and accelerates cellular aging. When purpose is present, the individual's brain seems better equipped to regulate the stress response, guiding energy away from rumination or threat perception and toward constructive coping and alternative solutions.
So it literally changes your body's response to hardship.
It appears so. It reduces both the perception of stress and the negative biochemical cascade that follows. This helps support immune function, reduces inflammation, and likely contributes to those quantifiable health benefits and increased longevity we see in the epidemiological studies. There's even research showing caregivers whose sense of purpose aligns strongly with their demanding role exhibit healthier immune markers than caregivers who feel their role is burdensome or meaningless. Purpose makes resilience physiological.
That's incredible. The theoretical model also defines purpose not as an all-or-nothing thing, but existing on a continuum across three crucial dimensions. What are those dimensions?
Right, it's not just have purpose or don't have purpose, it's more nuanced. Purpose is often measured or conceptualized along dimensions of scope. This refers to how pervasive the purpose is in a person's life. Does it influence virtually all life domains, work, family, hobbies, community engagement, or is it more confined to one specific area, like a particular passion project? Broader scope generally means more pervasive benefits. Strength. This is about the motivational force of that purpose. How strongly does it tend to influence the person's thoughts, emotions, and, crucially, their behaviors within its defined scope? A strong purpose is one that consistently guides action. And awareness. This refers to the extent to which the individual is consciously aware of and can articulate their purpose. Higher awareness is thought to be beneficial because it means less cognitive load is spent constantly figuring out what should I do or why am I doing this. Purposeful action becomes more integrated, automatic, and psychologically effortless.
Okay, scope, strength, and awareness. Finally, the model gets really specific. It details 5 stringent elements or characteristics that a life aim must possess to truly qualify as a purpose in this systemic, health-relevant sense, moving beyond just vague definitions. What are these essential elements?
Yes, these act almost like a checklist to distinguish genuine purpose from, say, fleeting interests or basic drives. For something to be considered a purpose in this framework, it generally must involve 1. Behavioral consistency. This is about grit, persistence, endurance. It's the underlying motivation to overcome significant obstacles, setbacks, and distractions, maintaining focus on the overarching aim across dynamic, changing conditions. A true purpose doesn't just fade away when things get difficult, it provides the strength to push through. 2. Appetitive motivation. The fundamental drive must be approach-oriented, not purely avoidance-oriented. Purpose is fundamentally about moving toward a desired future state, a valued outcome, or a meaningful contribution. It's about aspiration, positive goal pursuit, and growth, rather than just trying to escape negative states like fear or anxiety. Psychological flexibility. This is absolutely crucial for resilience and long-term pursuit. Purpose shouldn't mean rigid adherence to one specific path. It should provide the cognitive bandwidth and motivation to shift strategies, adapt tactics, and find new routes to the same overarching goal when situational demands change or obstacles arise. This flexibility is key for recovering from setbacks, like trauma or unexpected failures, without abandoning the core aim. 4. Efficient resource allocation. This brings us back to that practical, almost economic side we discussed earlier. A purpose should lead to the optimal management of one's finite personal resources, physical energy, mental energy, time. In a sense, purpose guides us, maybe unconsciously, to apply the equivalent of Ricardo's comparative advantage to our own lives, investing our limited resources where they generate the greatest return aligned with our overarching aim. We stop wasting energy on things that don't serve the purpose. 5. Higher level cognitive processing. This is important to differentiate human purpose from more basic primal drives shared with other animals, like seeking food, safety, or simple pleasure. The motivation must originate from, or be significantly mediated by, the higher cognitive functions of the cerebral cortex requiring insight, introspection, complex planning, abstract reasoning, and often a sense of meaning beyond immediate gratification.
So if someone's entire existence revolves around, say, maximizing simple physical pleasure, pure hedonism, even if they are incredibly consistent and efficient in that pursuit, it likely wouldn't meet this specific requirement for purpose because it's primarily driven by lower primal brain systems, not higher order cognition and meaning-making.
Exactly. That's the distinction the model makes. Purpose, in this health-relevant sense, involves that element of higher meaning, contribution, or connection to something beyond the self, processed through our most advanced cognitive capabilities.
Okay, we've established the philosophical imperative for relationality from Aristotle, the psychological necessity of belonging from SIT, the communitarian critique of excessive individualism, and the profound health benefits of individual purpose. Now let's bring all these threads together and apply them to perhaps the most intense, voluntary, intimate community most of us try to form, the romantic relationship. We move from the broad theoretical to the often messy, intensely practical reality of partnership.
Yes, and Source F brings us down to earth beautifully. It highlights a profound yet often overlooked truth. The simple act of working with another person toward a common goal, whether it's something mundane like raking leaves together or something significant like planning a future event or raising a family, this shared activity generates a deep inherent satisfaction. This feeling is linked directly back to our fundamentally cooperative social nature as humans.
It feels good to do things together, basically.
It feels inherently right and bonding. And this sensation is vital because, as the source argues, a sense of shared purpose acts as the grounding force, the anchor that elevates the relationship beyond just navigating the petty details and potential conflicts of daily events. It gives the relationship a why.
Our sources suggest that this shared purpose needs to go deeper than just surface-level compatibility, the stuff we often look for initially, like sharing hobbies, liking the same movies, or having similar tastes. What are the two essential forms this deeper shared purpose typically takes in enduring intimate partnerships?
The source identifies two main forms. The first is developing a shared purpose for the relationship itself. This involves setting internal goals focused on the quality and nature of the connection. For example, a couple might share a purpose of achieving truly harmonious relating, practicing radical honesty with each other, building a specific kind of mutually supportive home life, or maybe prioritizing deep emotional intimacy. The second form is cultivating a shared purpose for the world that the couple pursues together, looking outward. This could be dedicating their joint resources, time, money, energy, to public service or a social cause, raising children instilled with specific values they both hold dear, committing together to environmental stewardship, or maybe creating something together, art, a business, a community project that serves others.
So it can be inward-focused on the relationship's health, or outward-focused on their joint impact.
Exactly. And when a couple consciously articulates, agrees upon, and commits to one or ideally both of these kinds of shared high-level aims, it provides an incredibly powerful, almost unshakable element of connection and resilience. It gives them a compelling reason to weather the inevitable high-stress periods, to navigate conflicts constructively because they have a shared goal that transcends the immediate argument, and even to endure stretches of time when demanding jobs or life circumstances reduce their opportunities for spontaneous fun or connection. The shared purpose holds them together.
Now, this intimate sphere of the romantic relationship is precisely where that core tension we started with, the conflict between the modern emphasis on the autonomous self and the fundamental relational necessity, becomes most acute and often most painful. Particularly, it seems, for individuals who are transitioning out of long periods of being single and highly independent. We see this illustrated vividly in the case study from Source G, the experience shared by the 41-year-old Reddit user.
Yes, that case study is quite poignant. The user describes a state of profound confusion and anxiety bubbling up in his serious, long-term relationship. He was accustomed to being highly independent for many years, managing his own time and priorities. But after committing to his partner and moving towards cohabitation, he found himself really struggling with the transition. Specifically, the shift from the initial intense falling in love phase, the courtship phase, to what he perceived as the more mundane reality of day-to-day coexistence.
What did that mundane look like to him?
He described it as a feeling that the relationship had become defined primarily by short nightly visits after work, sharing household chores, and kind of casual, parallel interaction rather than focused connection or actively building
No.
something together. It felt directionless to him, maybe.
And he noted an interesting and uncomfortable inversion of roles had occurred over time.
Yes, he mentioned that initially in the relationship, he was the one perceived as perhaps too independent, maybe not making enough time, causing his partner to feel secondary sometimes. But after consciously adjusting his behavior, becoming more dedicated and available, the pendulum swung. He found he became the one with the increased need for closeness, reassurance, and shared time. And the conflict really crystallized when his partner started prioritizing intense, time-consuming gym classes several nights a week. She explicitly cited her need for these activities for her personal happiness and self-improvement, which is perfectly valid, of course. But the practical effect was a highly variable schedule that often left him feeling uncertain about when they would connect.
Leading to that core anxiety he expressed.
Exactly. This is the crux of the practical dilemma. The user voices this deep anxiety that he is now simply there to fill the blank spaces in her schedule, feeling like a leftover choice only after her individual personal pursuits and self-improvement goals are satisfied. The confusion and hurt seem to stem directly from their shared inability, or perhaps lack of conscious effort, to define the ongoing purpose of a serious cohabiting relationship beyond just sharing space and chores, especially when the default mode seems to be two individuals pursuing their own independent paths and then trying to fit the relationship in around the edges.
This case study really does perfectly illustrate the communitarian critique we discussed earlier, but played out in the most intimate setting. It is a practical emotional reality of trying to balance that drive for radical individual autonomy, the partner's legitimate pursuit of independent self-improvement goals at the gym, with the relational imperative required to build a stable, meaningful life together, founded on mutual benefit, shared direction, and the psychological safety that comes from feeling like a priority in an interdependent communal unit.
Absolutely. It's the theory made flesh, really. The individual pursuits themselves, like the partner's commitment to fitness, are entirely valid and even healthy under the banner of self-determination and personal well-being. The failure, or the source of the conflict, seems to lie in the negotiation, communication, and integration of these individually valued goals into the shared identity and purpose of the relationship itself. One of the insightful responses he received suggested exactly this, that the relationship's purpose must necessarily evolve and mature beyond the excitement and novelty of the initial courtship phase. It naturally shifts from primarily seeking intense romantic experiences to prioritizing things like mutual benefit, reliable partnership, consistent emotional and physical support, and building a shared life structure.
And finding ways to signal that commitment within the new reality.
Precisely. And one response captured the specific challenge of cohabitation perfectly, noting something like, you see each other all the time now, so every time you see each other, it isn't necessarily a special event, a date. So you have to figure out together when you're actually doing something together versus when you're just coexisting in the same space. That crucial difference between merely existing in parallel and actively engaging in shared action towards a shared purpose requires conscious attention and likely an explicitly discussed high-level purpose for the relationship to define those moments and ensure that the understandable needs of the autonomous self do not inadvertently swallow the relational self whole, leaving partners feeling disconnected and secondary. Hashtag outro. So if we try to synthesize all the incredibly rich material we've covered today, from Aristotle's ancient wisdom on the necessity of friendship, through the psychological mechanisms of social identity, the communitarian emphasis on embeddedness, right up to the modern research on purpose and health, and these intimate relationship struggles, the data seems overwhelmingly consistent. True human flourishing, long-term well-being, and genuine fulfillment don't seem to be achieved by maximizing individual rights and experiences in isolation. Instead, they appear to be strongly linked to engaging in a high-level, consistent, self-transcending purpose. And crucially, that purpose is often most effectively discovered, pursued, and sustained through deep relationality and connection with others. You could say purpose is the necessary engine that guides our efficient resource allocation, fuels our resilience, and gives life direction. But community, whether that's the community of two in a partnership or the broader polis, is the vital vehicle in which that engine functions best.
We've established pretty clearly that purpose-driven behavior leads not just to a more consistent life direction, but also to greater psychological flexibility and those really demonstrable, significant health benefits and longevity. So let's leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to consider for your own life. If you were to consciously and consistently reframe how you view your closest relationships, your friendships, your family connections, your romantic partnerships, seeing them not just as things you have or activities you need to fill to your already busy schedule, but as central, non-negotiable components of your overarching life purpose. How might that single fundamental shift in perspective change your approach to daily decisions, navigate inevitable compromises, handle communication struggles, and perhaps even influence your long-term health and well-being planning? Something to mull over. We sincerely hope this extensive deep dive into the philosophy and psychology of connection, purpose, and community has given you something truly valuable to think about, and maybe even something practical to integrate into your own life and relationships. If you enjoyed this exploration and found it useful, please do be sure to subscribe, like, and perhaps leave a comment to share your own insights or experiences. It really helps others find this deep dive as well. Thank you for listening to VSOW.